It all began when I was just a kid, bouncing on my father's knee.
Back in the PS2 generation, mascot games really still felt like a major part of gaming. You had Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Crash, Spyro, and then you had Sly Cooper. And I always looked at those games as really good entry points for new gamers. They were still platformers, but each one gave you a little taste of something bigger. Sly Cooper gave you a little bit of stealth, Ratchet and Clank gave you that over-the-top shooting and just this huge weapon variety. Jak 2 really leaned into that open city, mission-based structure that felt kind of like GTA. They could be hard in spots, but they were never impossible, and because of that, they had this way of introducing you to a genre without overwhelming you. A game like Sly Cooper could be someone's first real taste of stealth, and maybe that's what eventually pulls them towards games like Metal Gear Solid, Splinter Cell, or Hitman. That's something I miss in modern gaming. I spent a lot of time with this game as a kid, specifically with my stepmom. This was her favorite game. She had played through every single one of them, and we would take turns and let me take over if a spot got too rough. And if you're familiar with the channel, you already know that a lot of these older games are more than games to me. Really, games in general are. I look at them like time capsules, these little pieces of our lives, our memories, and the people we shared them with. And that's why I chose to do this one next. My stepmom passed away recently, and I wanted to open that time capsule up again. For me, for her, and for anyone watching who has their own memories attached to this game. The video itself is going to be the same as my other ones. We're still going to talk about what the game was, what it was trying to do, how it played, and just why it still matters. But the reason behind this one's different. So for you, Leeann, what was Sly Cooper?
The Thievius Raccoonus. Anyone who read it learned to be especially sneaky, which is why we specialize in stealing from criminals.
Let's start by looking back at where Sucker Punch was when Sly Cooper was being made. Because today, Sucker Punch already has a place in PlayStation history. A lot of people know them from Infamous or Ghost of Tsushima. And if you grew up around the PS2, then Sly Cooper is probably the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about the studio. Back then though, they were still trying to build that place. The company started in the late 90s, and a lot of the founding team came from Microsoft. They had a strong technical background, but they were still new to making games under their own name. Their first project was Rocket Robot on Wheels that was on the N64. And from what I've seen, that game was pretty well respected when it came out. It showed that Sucker Punch could make a creative platformer with real thought behind it. The harder part though is that a respected first game only gets you so far. Rocket did review well, but it never turned into a huge commercial breakout. So when they moved into their next project, they were in a spot where their next game had to reach people faster. That's where a lot of pressure starts coming in here. Sucker Punch needed a stronger first impression. They needed a character and a concept that people could understand quickly, especially during an era where platformers were still a big part of a console's identity.
And squashing you like the insignificant bug that you are!
Bring it on.
And the seed for Sly came from a pretty simple idea. Rocket already had a raccoon villain, and Sucker Punch liked the idea of turning a raccoon into the lead character for the next game. Brian Fleming talked about how raccoons naturally look like they're wearing a mask. And once they looked at the animal that way, the thief angle was already sitting there. A raccoon also already carries that sneaky nighttime image. So Sly had the hook right there in the design. A raccoon, a mask, and a thief. And from where Sucker Punch was at, that was probably the kind of idea they needed. After Rocket, they had already shown that they could make a good platformer. Now they needed something people could grab onto faster. Sly had that. That was a big deal in the early PS2 era. Most of Sony's mascot characters were from platformers. They had Jak and Daxter, and Ratchet and Clank was coming right around the corner, and then the older ones, Crash and Spyro. They were all tied to the way people thought about PlayStation character games. So Sucker Punch was stepping into a space where personality counted for a lot. A new platformer needed an angle, a hook. The stealth angle helped with that, because it gave the game a different kind of identity without pulling away from the platformer audience. That's where Sly found its place in the PS2 era. It was familiar enough to sit beside those other character platformers, but specific enough that it didn't blend into them. The character designs and just the overall graphic style and the stealth focus all gave Sucker Punch something they could point to and say, this is ours. Sony also became a big part of how the game found that lane. Sucker Punch had worked with Ubisoft on Rocket, but when they started looking for a publisher for Sly Cooper, they paid attention to the platformers that had really broken through. The ones people remembered were often backed by the companies that owned the hardware. That pushed them towards Sony. For a smaller studio, that partnership gave them focus. They could build for one system, aim at one audience, and put their attention into making the PS2 version as strong as they could. That was a practical choice also, because at the time, Sucker Punch was pretty small. They didn't have unlimited people or resources. And there were real goals attached to this. Fleming said that during production, their goals were to sell 500,000 copies and earn a sequel. That gives you a pretty clear idea of where the studio's head was at. They were trying to make a game successful enough to keep the company moving forward. That gives Sly Cooper a different kind of weight. On the surface, it has all the charm you'd expect from a PS2 platformer, but underneath that, Sucker Punch was trying to turn an early idea into a real future. And you can really see that same thinking in the art style. Dev Madden, the art director, said the team wanted people to feel like they were playing a cartoon. That gives you a clear picture of their target. They wanted a game that looked bold and stylized from the first glance. Something that could stand apart in screenshots, magazines, trailers, and just on the store shelf. That's part of why the game still looks good today. A lot of games from that generation were using the new power of the PS2 to push detail in different ways. Sucker Punch leaned into a cartoon style that fit the character and helped the game hold on to its look years later. The way everything's outlined, just the shapes, the comic book feel, it all helped sell the idea that this was a playable animated heist. So that's the position Sucker Punch was in when Sly Cooper started coming together. They were still early in their life as a studio, working with a character that gave them a clear direction, and building it during a moment where PlayStation still had room for new mascot platformers to break through. And once that foundation was there, the next question becomes how the game actually used it.
Been yapping about some big mysterious dude running around cracking skulls and this is it? You're the monkey wrench in my operation? Some scrawny rat with a stick.
So let's talk about the shape of the world. Each main hub is tied to one member of the Fiendish Five. The game introduces that villain, shows what kind of operation they're running, and then drops you into a hub area built around them. From there, the world branches into shorter levels, and each level gives you a key that pushes you closer to the boss. That's a pretty direct structure, but the reason it works is that every world has a very strong personality attached to it. The main hub levels aren't really there to be these big exploratory areas. It's more like a staging area. It gives you a central place to move through, shows you where the locked progress gates are, and points you towards the levels that you need to clear. There's not really a lot of confusion about what the game wants from you. The objectives usually stay the same, but the levels do enough around that objective to keep it from feeling stale. They still belong to the same world, so the theme carries through, but the layouts and dangers and just situations keep changing. One level can feel more vertical, another can be built around tighter movement, and then others can just throw a different type of route or obstacle at you. The game's working with small areas, but it keeps those areas really interesting and just fun to move through. And because each hub belongs so strongly to its boss, the whole thing almost feels episodic. Each world gets an intro. We learn the villain, we learn what they're doing, their backstory, and why Sly's going after them. They each even get names, like Sly Cooper in Sunset Snake Eyes. It adds to that cartoon adventure feeling, because every level feels like it has its own little identity inside the larger picture. That's really what I think the game handles really well. Every world feels like the boss turned into a place. The enemies match the tone, the layout matches the theme, the mood changes from one section to the next. You're never really going to confuse whose area you're in, because the game makes each territory feel like a distinct extension of the villain running it. Then the boss fights become the payoff. And this is where the structure really lands for me, because the bosses in Sly Cooper are one of the strongest parts of the game. They're not usually difficult in a way that feels frustrating or overwhelming. The gimmick of each fight's usually easy enough to learn, but they're all different, and that gives each world a real finale. Raleigh's fight's built around platform timing. You're waiting for openings, moving between platforms, and just watching how he changes the arena. Miss Ruby's fight turns into a rhythm sequence, where the PlayStation button symbols come at you in time with the music while she casts spells. That kind of variety gives the bosses a lot of personality. They really feel like the end of that specific world, not just a stronger enemy waiting behind the final door. After clearing the hub, collecting the keys, and opening the final path, the boss fight gives the area a closing moment. The villain gets their set piece, the episode wraps up, and then the game moves into the new territory with a completely different tone. So even though the structure is very easy to follow, it gives the game a strong forward pull.
This is gonna be fun.
Hey, just real quick, if you've made it this far into the video, I really appreciate you for hanging out with me for a bit. If you're enjoying it, consider subbing. There's already a lot of content like this on the channel, and there's always more on the way. And if you want to help the video grow, leave it a like and drop a comment. Let me know what your memories are with this game. I think this is actually the first cartoon platformer I've covered on the channel, so if you've stuck around for this one, it really does mean a lot. But enough of all that. Let's get back into Sly. Once you're inside the individual levels, the game starts adding another layer on top of the main route. Like I said, the main stages are pretty short, and the broad goal is clear. But the clue bottles are what makes those levels feel more involved. The nice thing is that the bottles usually fit into the way you're already moving through the level. A lot of them are close to the main path. You'll see them sitting near platforms, around the corners, behind breakable objects, or just tucked into a spot that wants you to pay a little bit more attention. You're never having to run miles away from where you were already going. And I think that's why the bottle system's cool. It gives these small levels a second pass of attention without turning them into a huge scavenger hunt. You're still moving forward, still playing through the stage, but now you're paying a little bit more attention to the areas. It also helps that the bottles feel connected to the main point of the game. They never come across like random collectible objects thrown in because the game needed more things to pick up. They're tied to the safes, and the safes are tied to the Thievius Raccoonus, your family's book. So when you're grabbing those bottles, it feels like part of rebuilding that book. That framing gives the whole system a bit more weight. Once you find every bottle in a level, you get the code to open the safe. You open the safe, get a page back, and learn about a Cooper family member, and then get an ability that came from them. And that's super cool. So the upgrades are tied directly into Sly's family legacy.
Incredible! I never would have thought this was possible. Sir Augustine of Cooper's technique to briefly defy gravity.
The abilities themselves can vary though. Some of them feel really useful, almost immediately. The dive attack gives Sly a bit more impact and speed while he's fighting. The invisibility move feels like something that can actually change how you approach certain situations. But then you have abilities like the hat mines, which are just more situational, and it never really became part of how I played the game. But even when a reward is less useful, the framing still helps carry it. You're still recovering another piece of the book, you're filling in another part of Sly's family history. And because the game keeps those levels small, going after those pages usually feels like something you can actually finish. There are a few moments where the bottle hunts can slow down. Every now and then you'd end up missing one bottle and running back through the whole level trying to figure out where it was. It doesn't happen constantly, but there were definitely a couple stages where I spent longer than I probably needed to looking for the last one. The binocular upgrade helps a bit with that. Once you find it, the binoculars can mark bottles and breakable objects, which makes picking up all the bottles a lot easier. The catch is that you have to find that upgrade again in each main world. So if you get it in one boss territory, then move to the next one, you have to earn that help again before it starts guiding you there. That can be a little annoying, but the overall completion loop still feels approachable. And I think that says a lot about the game, because this was actually the first game I ever 100% completed as a kid. The levels were small enough that it felt possible, and the rewards gave me enough of a reason to keep going until the book was finished. That completion piece also connects to the ending. To get the full ending, you need every page of the Thievius Raccoonus, so the game ties completion back into the thing Sly's been chasing the entire time. Finishing the book becomes more than a to-do list. It becomes the way that you fully finish the journey. Then the game adds one more layer after that. Once you beat a level, you unlock the Master Thief run, which is basically the time trial version of that stage. And this changes how you look at that same level. The first time through, you're learning the layout, watching enemy placement, looking for bottles. During the Master Thief run, the level becomes a route you have to execute. You need to know where to jump, where the enemies are, how their attacks work, and where you can save a few seconds. The timer gets really tight too. Most of the times I finished one of these runs, I was down to only a few seconds left. So even though the levels are short, the Master Thief runs ask you to understand them in a different way. You're taking the same level and turning it into a perfect route. The reward for finishing those runs is developer commentary. After completing the time trial, you can go back through that level and listen to the developers talk about how it was made.
What was challenging in lighting this level, okay? You have fire in here, you have multi-levels, you have lasers. Yep.
They go into things like older versions of the stage, ideas they tried, and different directions they were considering while building it. And for me, that's just super cool. I have a degree in game design, so hearing developers talk through the process behind a level is really interesting to me. It gives you a look at the decisions behind the level you just played through. and it turns replaying the level into something more than another completion task.
And he had a bow tie. Our NPCs were all kind of formal, wearing formal wear.
So if you want to fully complete Sly Cooper 100%, you're usually going through each level a few different ways. You clear it once and find all the bottles, you learn the level well enough to complete the Master Thief run, and then you play it again to listen to the dev commentary. That's how the game gets more out of its smaller stages. Now let's get into the combat and the stealth. The main thing is that the game keeps the stealth very easy to understand. You're just watching patrols, avoiding spotlights, sneaking around enemies, and waiting for the right moment to move. It is stealth, but it's built in a way that feels really quick and approachable. The game usually gives you enough information to know what's safe, what's dangerous, and where Sly can go. And a lot of that comes down to the blue thief auras. Those glowing points are one of the clearest ways the game teaches you movement. When you see them, you know Sly can do something there. He can land on a narrow point, or walk across a rope, or climb a pipe, or just do some thief move that makes him feel different from normal platforming characters. That's where the stealth and platforming kind of blend together. Sneaking in the game usually isn't about hiding in shadows for a long time. It's more about moving carefully through the area. You just wait, jump, climb, balance, drop down, and slip past the enemy. The thief fantasy comes from how Sly moves as much as what he's avoiding. The game also keeps the pressure on you by making all the damage one-shot. Sly usually goes down in one hit unless he has a lucky horseshoe. A silver horseshoe gives him one extra hit, a gold one gives him two. So the game has some forgiveness built in, but you still feel the risk when you miss a jump or get spotted or run into an enemy at the wrong time. And the enemies work in a similar way. Most of them go down with one clean hit from the cane. So combat is there, but it usually doesn't turn into long fights. You watch the enemies, wait for the opening, and swing when it's safe, and then you just keep moving. And as far as moving and combat, that's really the main feel for the whole game. A lot of Sly Cooper just comes down to timing. When to jump, wait, sneak, when to swing your cane, or move through a patrol route before the next spotlight comes around. And because the game is built around those short levels, that timing never gets too exhausting. Mistakes can still punish you, but restarting or trying again usually doesn't feel like a huge setback. You just learn the patterns, clean up your movement, and move on. Every now and then, Sly Cooper steps away from the normal kind of level. When these first come up, you'll go in expecting the normal structure, but instead the game gives you something else entirely. Sometimes it's a race, or you're protecting Murray while he runs through the map. Sometimes you're controlling a vehicle or playing through a one-off idea that barely plays like the rest of the game. These stages skip the bottle and save structure, so the focus gets narrowed down. You're just there for the key, and the level's built around whatever the gimmick is. That can be a little strange at first because the game's already taught you a certain way to move through these areas. And suddenly it wants you to race, aim through a scope, drive something around, or play a little hacking sequence as Bentley. For the most part, I liked having those breaks. There are only a couple of them in each world, so they never really take over the game. They show up, change the pace for a few minutes, and then the game gets back to the main Sly levels. That helps a lot, because some of these ideas are fun in short bursts, and they probably wouldn't hold up if the game leaned on them too much.
That's no tower, it's a giant death ray! Sly, take out those rocks or we're in trouble!
The races were some of the ones I enjoyed the most. They're quick, easy to understand, and they fit the energy of the game. You're still chasing a key, but now the pressure's coming from turning, your timing, and just keeping the race clean enough to stay ahead. They can get really tight, but in the arcade way, where you want to try again instead of feeling like the game is just wasting your time. But then the Murray Escort sections are where I was a little less into it. Those put you in a fixed spot with a scope, while Murray runs through the level. You're picking off enemies from a distance. The idea fits the crew setup, but I just didn't enjoy them as much because they pull you away from actually moving through the level yourself. The one-off levels are probably the most interesting of the bunch. There's a hacking section where you play as a cyber Bentley, and it almost feels like asteroids. Then you have stuff like driving the van around, picking up items while these lava creatures are racing against you. Those sections are weird, but they feel like the kind of weird this game can get away with. They also create some of the harder moments in the game. A lot of the challenge comes from timers. You might have to grab enough items before the time runs out, or just do a certain objective so many times before the time runs out. The game's not usually asking for anything too complicated, but the timer can make those sections feel a lot tighter than the normal levels.
According to my paranormal scan, that flowing soup is really highly charged ectoplasm.
And that's where some of that can be hit or miss. When the idea is fun, it breaks up the game in a good way. When the control style isn't as strong, or the idea is just tedious, the levels can drag a little bit. But since these stages are spread out in small amounts, they usually feel like part of the game's variety instead of something getting in the way. I think that's really the important thing here. Even when a special level plays completely different from the normal loop, it still feels like it belongs to Sly Cooper. The tone, the key structure, the cartoon energy, it's all still there. The game is just changing the form for a few minutes. So the story here is extremely easy to follow. Sly comes from the Cooper family, a long line of master thieves who's passed their techniques down through a book called the Thievius Raccoonus. That book is basically the family legacy. It holds their history, their skills, and the techniques each generation added over time. Then the Fiendish Five break into the Cooper home, steal the book, and split the pages between themselves. That group is made up of Sir Raleigh, Mugshot, Ms. Ruby, the Panda King, and Clockwork. Each one takes part of the book, and each one becomes a different piece of the journey Sly has to work through. So right from the jump, the story gives Sly a clear reason to go after them. He's trying to recover what was taken from his family, and that keeps the plot really focused. It gives the game a clear emotional center without making the story feel heavy. Sly eventually forms the Cooper gang with Bentley and Murray. Bentley is the planner. He handles the research, the mission details, and a lot of the communication while Sly's out in the field. Murray is the driver and the muscle. He usually brings in this loud, goofy energy to the group. And then, of course, Sly's at the center of that trio. He's the one that does all the sneaking, the stealing, and confronting the villains directly. The game gives him that calm, charming thief personality, and that really helps keep the whole thing light, even though his backstory is pretty rough. Carmelita Fox adds another layer to that. She's the inspector trying to catch him, and her being there gives the story its chase dynamic. Sly's always moving towards the next piece of the book, and Carmelita is usually somewhere behind him trying to bring him in. Their relationship gives the game a ton of personality. Carmelita takes the law very seriously. Sly enjoys staying one step ahead of her. The game plays that back and forth with a lot of charm. So their scenes usually feel more like a cat and mouse chase than just pure hostility.
2. 1.
That's part of why Sly still feels like the good guy in this story. He is a thief, and the game never really hides that. His whole identity is built around stealing and sneaking into places, getting away. The difference comes from who he targets and why he's doing it. Sly has a code. He's going after criminals who stole from his family and used that power for themselves. So the fantasy lands closer to a heroic outlaw story. He's breaking the law, but the story frames his actions through legacy and taking down people who are worse than him. That gives the whole thing a little bit of a Robin Hood feeling. Sly's playing outside of the rules, but the game never frames him as cruel or selfish. He steals with purpose, protects his friends, and respects the Cooper legacy. And even when he is being cocky, there's still a line he doesn't cross. I feel like that's all the story really needs to do. It gives us Sly, Bentley, Murray, Carmelita, the Fiendish Five, and the stolen book. From there, the game just lets the style, the characters, and the world carry a lot of everything else. It's a very simple story, but I think it really works for this kind of game.
Made illegal in the World Peace Accord of 71, earned Ms. Ruby a life sentence behind bars. While the gang and I enjoyed a few weeks in the tropical sunshine, working on our tans in preparation for our next caper.
So when this game came out in 2002, critics were pretty positive on it overall. On Metacritic, the PS2 version sits at an 86, so the response at the time was clearly strong. Looking through the reviews, you see a lot of the same things come up. The look of the game, the animation, the controls, the style, and the way it mixed platforming with stealth. And that kind of reaction really lines up with what the game is. Sly Cooper is a very easy game to understand once you see it in motion. It has a very clear style, the controls feel smooth, and the levels are designed well. So if someone only played it for a little bit, the appeal was probably going to come through pretty fast. GameSpot gave it a 7.8, and that review is a good example of how people were talking about it at the time. They praised the presentation, the cel-shaded look and animation, the stealth angle, and the variety in the levels. They also talked about how the game moved away from the kind of heavy scavenger hunt design that a lot of 3D platformers had leaned on before. And that part's pretty interesting because it shows where Sly Cooper was landing in the genre. By 2002, 3D platformers had already been through years of collecting, these open levels, big checklists. Sly Cooper still had things to find, but the main flow was a bit tighter. You moved through shorter stages, grabbed keys, opened safes, you wanted the extra layer, and just kept pushing forward. So I think critics were responding to how focused it felt. It had enough variety to keep changing the pace, but it was also easy to pick up and play. The different world themes, the races, the vehicle sections, the boss fights, and the short level structure all gave the game a lot of movement from one idea to the next. The main complaint, though, was length. That comes up a lot in the reviews from the time. Critics liked what was there, and then they got through it faster than they wanted to. GameSpot basically said the game was great while it lasted, then pointed out that it felt a few levels short of reaching that next level. Game critics had a similar reaction. They praised the style, the controls, and the charm, but also talked about the game being short for the price. Their second opinion brought up the idea of paying $40 for something that could be finished around 8 to 10 hours, which gives a good picture of the value conversation back then. That was a real part of how games were judged at the time. A full-price PS2 game being short could hurt the way people talked about it, even when they enjoyed the actual experience. And with Sly Cooper, that seems to be where most of the pushback landed. People liked the game. They liked how it looked, moved, the stealth, the personality. They just wanted more of it. And honestly, I think that's the easiest way to understand the original reception. The game came out strong, critics connected with what Sucker Punch was doing, and the biggest issue just seems to be how short it was. Looking at Sly Cooper now, I think the easiest way to understand its place is to look at how long the name stayed attached to PlayStation. The first game came out in that PS2 era where Sony had a lot of personality in its platformers. You had Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, and Sly Cooper all sitting in that same generation, and each one gave PlayStation a different kind of character game. Sly ended up becoming one of those names people still connect to that era. Maybe the series sits in a more specific space than some of Sony's biggest franchises, but among PS2 fans, Sly has always had a strong identity. When people talk about PlayStation platformers from that generation, his name is usually part of the conversation. And I think that says a lot about what this first game did. It gave Sucker Punch a character that could last beyond one release. It gave Sony another mascot-style series with its own lane. And it gave people a platformer that felt different enough to stick in your memory, even next to other major names from that period. The sequels expanded the formula from there. Sly 2 and Sly 3 pushed the series further into bigger worlds, bigger heists, and more playable character roles. That's where I really think the series hit its stride, especially with Sly 2. Those games took the foundation of the first one and built a broader crime caper structure around it. That also gives the first game its own kind of place now. Going back to the Thievius Raccoonus, it feels like the most focused version of the original idea. It's smaller, tighter, and more direct. You can feel the series being born here before the sequels start widening the scope. And for a first entry, that focus really helped it age in an interesting way. It has the roughness you'd expect from the beginning of a series, especially compared to what came later. But the core identity is already there. The tone, style, character fantasy, the PlayStation platformer energy, all of that's already in place. That's probably why the game never fully disappeared. The series went quiet for long stretches, and fans have been asking for a new entry for years. Even during that silence though, Sly kept showing up through collections, anniversary posts, classic re-releases, and just fan conversations. The character stayed around because people still had a real attachment to that world. And that's Sly Cooper. I really hope you all like this one. And like I mentioned at the beginning, this video is from my late stepmom, Leeann. She really loved these more E-rated platformer games. Of course, she played Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank and the Sly games, but she also introduced me to some weirder ones too. Games like Dr. Muto, Sphinx and the Cursed Mummy, and Mr. Mosquito. And looking back, there's a couple moments that are pretty funny now. She was not into anything violent at all. And if you know this channel, you know I clearly went in a different direction there. One day I was playing Fable 2, and I had made it to the point to where you could sacrifice people. So I was messing around with that, and then I said, wait, I wonder if I can get a kid to follow me. She was not happy with that. Then another time, when Resident Evil 4 came out, I was playing through the first village fight, and Dr. Salvador cut Leon's head off. Right in front of my stepsister. She got pretty mad at me for showing that to her daughter. But she was a good woman. She treated me like her own kid, and I'm grateful I got to share games like this with her. So I hope wherever she is now, she's at peace in the universe with the stars again. If you all enjoyed the video and you haven't yet, I'd really appreciate a sub. I'm hoping to hit at least 15,000 before the end of the summer. And if you want to help the video grow, sharing it around with people you think would enjoy it helps a lot too. But either way, I hope you all liked it, and as always, I'll see y'all later.
Panda King, and finally Clockwork. I'd beaten them all one by one and reclaimed my birthright. Of course, there was no way I could have gotten here without the help of my pals.